So contrary to popular belief, the legal definition of a machine gun has nothing to do with how fast a gun can actually shoot, but how many bullets are fired with one pull of the trigger. The legal definition of a machine gun is any weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can be readily restored to shoot automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger. The reason why the definition of a machine gun is based on function and not rate of fire is because rate of fire in a semi-auto gun is determined by the shooter and not the gun, which would mean the ATF would be literally trying to regulate my trigger finger. And because they can't do that, they come up with any arbitrary number that makes no sense. But that's not stopping the ATF from trying to change the definition of a machine gun. The ATF recently sent out a cease and desist letter to the company Rare Breed Firearms to stop selling and making their aftermarket triggers because the ATF is now considering their trigger a machine gun, even though their trigger mechanically functions as a semi-auto. What you're about to watch is a conversation between me and the president of Rare Breed Firearms about how they're fighting back against the ATF's tactics and what you can do to help them. We are in some very interesting times. We're usually, as a community, when I say community, I'm talking about the gun community as a whole, we're kind of usually on our toes because we're constantly dealing with attacks from various agencies, different politicians, groups, so forth and so on. And now we are met with another one, Rare Breed Triggers. So, right. For those who don't know what Rare Breed Triggers is, all of that good stuff, what exactly is the Rare Breed Trigger and what does it do?
Okay. I'm going to take a step back. Okay. About 4 years ago, we had a concept for a trigger. Weren't really sure if it would work, but it looked good on paper. And so we created a prototype, and it worked. And that prototype was so convincing, we decided to, move through the patent process, and then try to take that prototype and turn it into a production model. And as we're moving through that process and things started looking good, we were like, all right, we moved through our due diligence. But before I get to due diligence, I'll tell you about about this trigger. Yeah. It is unlike, anything currently on the market. The technology is very interesting. Now, we all know how a standard mil-spec semi-automatic trigger works. You pull the trigger, it fires around. Now, you as the shooter can maintain that pressure and hold the trigger to the rear, or you can choose at what point to release that pressure and come back and get a reset and fire again. Now, you can do that very quickly, especially if you're like Jerry Mitchell, like you can, do it extremely quickly. Yeah. Well, then most people are familiar with binaries. You pull the trigger, it fires, but when you release the trigger, it fires. Mm-hmm. Ours is different than both of those. How it operates, and you've got to have a little bit of gun knowledge in order to kind of follow me here, but when you pull the trigger, it releases the hammer moves forward, fires the round, and that starts sending the bolt carrier to the rear. As the carrier comes to the rear, it forces the hammer back down into the position. Well, as the hammer is coming down into position, it is going to force the trigger to reset. It's going to be a mechanical reset. So the metal on metal is pushing the trigger forward, and therefore pushing the shooter's finger forward to get that reset. Gotcha. Now, as that happens, as soon as the trigger moves back forward and moves into the reset position, a locking bar at the back of the trigger pack pivots into position and physically locks the trigger. You cannot, as a shooter, no matter how hard you pull that trigger, you cannot pull the trigger again until the carrier makes it all the way back into battery. Yeah. Now, as the carrier is moving into battery, it will hit the locking bar, pivot it out of position, and allow the shooter to pull the trigger again. So the shooter can only pull the trigger and fire one round on the pull function of the trigger. Unlike a binary, that will also fire on the release. But no, it is one round per function of the trigger, and that function is only on the pull function of the trigger. Now, is it fast? Yes. It can be exceptionally fast. It allows the shooter the opportunity to pull the trigger as fast as however your gun is tuned, however fast it will cycle. So every time that carrier moves back into battery, it allows the shooter the opportunity to pull the trigger.
Gotcha. So for some people who are wondering, like, why is he being so pedantic about what the locking mechanism does and doesn't do? Explain to them from a definition standpoint what is considered fully automatic and what is considered semi-automatic, because a lot of people will get confused and think, okay, well, this is a fully automatic trigger, and that's not the case. Or it turns a gun into a fully automatic.
Right. Okay, sure. Now, it's very easy. And I'm going to give you the layman's definition of a machine gun, but the most significant portion of the definition is by a single function of the trigger. Now, when you pull the trigger on a full auto trigger, when you pull it to the rear, the trigger just stays to the rear and it continues firing until you release the trigger. Now, ours does not operate like that at all. That is multiple rounds per that single function of the trigger for a machine gun. Ours, when you pull it and you fire and the carrier comes back, forces the hammer down into the trigger, forces your finger forward into the reset. That is the reset. Then you pull again, it fires again. When you then it forces your finger forward into the reset. When you pull again, it fires again, and then it will force your finger forward into the reset. So it is one round for each pull function of the trigger.
Yeah.
Therefore, it meets the legal definition of a semi-automatic trigger.
Yeah. And the reason why I wanted you to harp on that is because I think a lot of people have this perception that what distinguishes a fully automatic and a full automatic and semi-automatic is the number of rounds per second, or the actual speed. When in reality, it's about the mechanical function of the actual firearm that designates it, whether it's a full automatic or semi-automatic, which is right. Which is what you're explaining to us now.
And it's not, a lot of people get wrapped around like the rate of fire. And it's not that the gun fires fast. It's how does the gun fire fast.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys have created this trigger, because I'm a trigger snob. I've always been a trigger snob. I love great triggers. I've actually in many of my videos talked about how, this particular trigger allows me to shoot a lot faster than, say, this other gun. And we're still talking about semi-automatic guns. Every trigger kind of has its own character. And you guys,
that's right.
And you guys designed a trigger that has its own character that allows people to shoot a lot faster than they normally would with, say, other semi-automatic guns. So what has happened now that, first of all, how has the market received this particular trigger?
There are a lot of people that absolutely love it and think it is, the next best thing. It's not for everyone. We do have our fair share of haters, and that's fine. Not everybody, likes it or even appreciates it, and that's fine.
That's the internet in general, actually.
I will tell you this, since this trouble ensued, the support has been overwhelming, but we can circle back to that as we start moving into the trouble.
Gotcha. Well, actually, we can jump right into it, actually, as a matter of fact, because now you guys have come out with this product, you put it on the market, and like you said, there's been a lot of people that love it. There's some people that have their own critiques about it, and that is the case with almost any product that gets launched on the internet. I mean, I put out products, and there are some people that hate it, there are some people that love it. That being said, I haven't been hit by a notice to stop making my products by the ATF.
Right.
Unlike you guys. So what has happened with respect to the ATF in this particular trigger?
All right, we'll take a slight step backwards and talk to you about a lot of people are hating on us for not seeking an ATF approval letter.
Okay.
We didn't. And I truly feel like we had no reason to, but I'll explain that.
Okay.
When you're dealing with a product that, the ATF may or may not question, it's customary. We can all agree it is customary for people to seek an ATF approval letter. Now, before going to market, we sought the expert legal opinions of 4 specific people. Like we, shake the trees. We found the absolute best experts in our community. All 4 of them are prior ATF agents. Between the 4 of them, they have more than 100 years combined experience. One of them wrote and co-wrote the actual instructional manuals used at the ATF National Academy on classification and identification of NFA items. In addition, one of them is the prior chief of the ATF's technical branch.
Okay.
For those people that don't know, it is the ATF's technical branch that actually makes determinations on products like this. So, in addition to those 4 experts, we sought the opinion of numerous attorneys. So, being that we had done that much significant due diligence, and all of them came to their independent conclusions that the FRT is a perfectly legal semi-automatic trigger, it was unnecessary for us to ask for an ATF approval letter because a semi-automatic trigger is not a regulated item. So we did not seek their approval.
Gotcha. So it's not required, for the people who don't know, so it's not required by law that if you come out with a product and you put it out into the sphere of commerce with respect to firearms and firearm accessories, you're not required to get ATF approval.
Right. Absolutely. Now, and we didn't feel like it was necessary. I mean, especially with the amount of due diligence that we had conducted, a tremendous amount. Now, we go to market. We've been on the market for, many months. And, people are loving the product or, hating on the product, either way. And out of nowhere, we get a cease and desist from the ATF. And they had claimed that they had determined the FRT to be a machine gun. Now, when they made this determination, they personally served the company's owner and attorney with a copy of the cease and desist, and they referenced an alleged examination that had been conducted. But they didn't have a copy of the examination. The special agent in charge admitted he had never seen the examination. The special agent in charge admitted he had never even actually seen a physical sample of the FRT trigger, but he was there to serve cease and desist.
So how did they even become aware of the trigger in the first place?
Right. Well, I mean, good question. So in addition to serving that cease and desist, it threatens significant, criminal action. So we immediately responded to their cease and desist, let them know that we did not agree with their claims. We would not comply, especially under those circumstances. And then we filed a lawsuit in federal court in the Middle District of Florida. Now, in that lawsuit, we immediately asked the judge for a temporary restraining order. We asked for injunctive relief. We asked for a legal determination of what that trigger is going to be based on the letter of the law.
Yeah.
Now, right now, this is where things get absolutely insane, crazy. I am having a very difficult time as an American wrapping my head around this. But we all can agree that due process is the linchpin of our judicial system in America.
Absolutely.
And the ATF has made an argument, and not just verbal, it is in court documents. They have made an argument that we should not be afforded due process, that we should not be able to submit evidence to the court, and we should not be able to have expert testimony heard by the court. The court should make their determination based on the ATF's input and their input alone, and we should not even get to the merits of the case for the court to be able to make that determination.
So
that blows my mind.
So if I understand you correctly, so we're talking criminal here.
No, this is civil.
This is civil. Okay. All right.
Now, criminal is well, we'll see.
Gotcha.
It should but I will tell you this. When dealing with a civil issue, the administrative agency, this executive agency, can be granted deference. And what I mean by deference, I could get really into the weeds, but it basically comes to a Supreme Court case from the early 80s having to do with the Clean Air Act. And there was a definition that was a bit ambiguous. And in order to get a clear definition, the EPA was granted deference for them to provide a clear definition, and that was the law. That is how it was going to be. So in cases moving forward, if there is a misunderstanding in a definition, or if it's not clear, or if it's ambiguous, well, they will look to that agency to be, the deciding factor on what to clear up that definition. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a very slippery slope.
To say the least.
We have Congress for a reason, and their job is to legislate and create laws. Now, what we've seen happen is that these executive agencies, like the ATF, will say, oh no, this definition's a bit confusing, but leave it to us, we'll clear it up for you. And then they basically create legislation where it did not previously exist simply by reinterpreting the definition in a law. And that is exactly what is happening in our case. So they've taken the definition of machine gun out of the Gun Control Act and the National Firearms Act. But what they've done is added language into the law that doesn't exist in the law. So, hence, creating legislation where it didn't exist. Now, the way that I explain this to people, it's very simple to me. Mm-hmm. When Congress wrote the law that defined a machine gun, they drew a box and said, all right, stay in this box. Anything you do in this box, it's okay. But if you step outside this box, now you've created a machine gun. Well, I'd like to pat myself on the back and, my entire team and everybody that's worked on this, because we've achieved a very unique goal and we've been able to stay in that box. Yeah. But now the ATF says, well, we're going to change the shape of that box. Like, we're going to make it smaller. Well, hold on. What do you mean you're going to make it smaller? You're not Congress. You don't get to do that. Yeah. You don't get to make the law. But they're going to do it. And then they want to argue that I shouldn't be able to submit evidence or expert witness testimony to support
an alternative
case.
Do you think that's because they understood the process that you guys went through in terms of getting, in terms of bringing the trigger to market by having those certain individuals who had prior history with the ATF?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And here's why. If we argue the merits of this case, we're going to win. Yeah. All day long, twice on Tuesdays, we're going to win. So they do not want us to get to the merits of the case.
They want to be able to change the rule.
This is a bit risky, and this is something that I've got a lot of passion about, and I'm very mad about it. I'm very angry about. But in a civil case, this executive agency can be granted deference. But in a criminal matter, they cannot be granted deference. Mm-hmm. And in a criminal matter, if I were to be criminally charged, the prosecutor would have to convince an entire jury that our product meets the definition of a machine gun by the letter of the law with no reinterpretation. And that, I feel very, very confident that that can't happen. Mm. But I feel cheated as an American that they want to play dirty on the civil side because they're given an opportunity. And in order to have the merits of the case actually heard and argued, I've got to risk going to prison for the rest of my life simply to have the opportunity to argue the merits of the case. And I don't think that's okay. That's not the way this system was intended to work.
Yeah, so that is kind of that's actually not kind of, it's really dirty. So it's basically they hang the criminal prosecution, possible criminal prosecution over your head and say, okay, we can argue the merits of this case if you want to risk basically going to jail, or we can go the civil route and we'll change the law, change things up. You'll lose, but at least you won't go to jail. But you only lost because we changed the rules.
So right now, I feel that the pressure is getting heavier daily. They're moving a little bit, harder daily. But at some point, and I'm not saying this is the hill I want to die on, by no means. I have a family. I have 2 little boys. I love my family. I do not want to risk that. I do not want to risk going to prison. But at some point, you've got to draw a line and say what you're doing isn't okay. Yeah. How on earth is it okay for a bunch of unelected officials running an executive agency to create legislation through executive fiat that can change the landscape of our gun rights forever?
And I think people miss that point. I think they look at this as a kind of a singular issue. They're like, oh, well, it's just a trigger, but it sets a very dangerous precedent.
So the best way that I can kind of explain this to people, whether you like our trigger or not, whether you think it's stupid or it's the next best thing, This isn't about our trigger.
That's what I was thinking. It's not the point. Yeah.
This is, I feel confident, and this isn't me like just thinking I'm, the coolest guy on the planet. I have a feeling this is going to be a huge landmark case. Because if they're allowed to do this, if they're allowed to stretch the definition of machine gun to reach the FRT, where will it stop? So David Chipman, the administration's guy that they're trying to push in to lead the ATF, he's already on the record stating he wants to ban the AR-15. Yeah. Well, he's also on the record stating that any gun chambered larger than a .22 caliber and magazine fed could be classified as a machine gun. Mm-hmm. And how are they going to do that? They will simply reinterpret the law. Now, I don't know how they're going to do that. Are they just going to say that an AR-15 is just a bunch of parts that are readily, changeable or modifiable to become a machine gun? Well, maybe. I don't know how they'll do it, but I know that if they can stretch the definition now to meet our product, they can do it to meet any product.
Well, I mean, honestly, if I were to think of some creative ways they could possibly do it, is by way of triggers. There are a lot of guns that come with, say, for instance, Geisley triggers or aftermarket triggers that are not necessarily stock triggers. Sure. And you could say, well, no, this trigger has been modified to be able to shoot faster, even though that's not the definition for what construes.
Well, how would you
machine gun?
You qualify shoot faster? Faster than what? Faster than who? Faster than a 90-year-old woman or a 4-year-old child? Or Jerry? How do you define that?
You can't. That's why the inherent test is mechanical.
Right.
Because you can define that. But
a single function of the trigger. Yeah. There you go. It's very simple. Yeah. And for them to argue that there's any ambiguity there is ridiculous on its face.
Yeah. So what do you think is the reason why they're coming after you guys? Do you have any? And feel free to go into conspiratorial land. I
don't really think it's much of a conspiracy, but I can speculate.
Yeah.
And I'll speculate. I've seen it already put out in kind of like the gun tuber world, but somebody at the ATF that is I don't know what their position would be, just internet troll, whatever. Somebody that just looks on the internet for things to bring to the attention of the ATF. Noted our trigger in January of this year. Now, before they had ever even seen or touched our trigger, they had already said, oh, it's going to be a machine gun. We just need to get our hands on one. Yeah. So they had already predetermined and prejudged it to be a machine gun. Yeah. And then once they got their hands on it, they backed into a determination. Yeah. They had already made their decision. They just backed into it. And simply put, I really, truly believe in my heart of hearts, it just has to do with rate of fire. Can you fire this trigger fast? Absolutely, you sure can.
So let's find a way to make it fit.
Fire binary fast. Mm-hmm. And the explanation of how a binary is legal, I fully agree with. It is a function of the trigger. When you pull, that is a function, it fires. When you release, that is a function, and it fires. So it makes sense. But you can also fire binaries very fast. And to be honest, if you get a very good race trigger, a single stage race trigger, you can fire that extremely fast too.
I've done it in my videos.
It's easier for them to come after us and this product just because it's scary.
Well, what it honestly does, I think, is it's kind of a preemptive measure in a lot of ways. As far as any other companies that may come behind you to come up with other products that are innovative, right? Because what it does is they don't necessarily even have to win, to be honest, to get their job done. Because what it'll do is the more they can tie you up and the more they can make life hell for you, and it's on public display, you'll be held up as an example. It's like, you can try to come out with any other products if you want, but guess what? If you do, we're going to make your life hell. And inevitably, what that ends up doing is that stifles innovation within the industry. And without innovation, the industry inevitably ends up dying. We all know how they feel about innovation when it comes to firearms, because they're constantly telling us they meant muskets whenever they were talking about the Second Amendment, right? And a lot of people don't realize that's why, in many ways, the gun industry is usually behind the times in a lot of ways, not because we don't like innovation, not because there aren't people out there who are creating innovative products, but we're stifled by law.
Right.
We're always stifled by law. Every hoop, every barrier, they toss it at us. They take the kitchen sink and then they put it in a bigger kitchen sink and then they toss that at us. And so,
and, I mean, that's my biggest my biggest gripe is we were innovative and we stayed in that box. Yeah. Now we just want to change the size of the box.
Yep.
And that, all right, if you want to do that, I can support that, but you don't do it at the agency level. You go back to Congress and say, hey, we've got a problem and we need to change the laws, and you use the system the way it was designed.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the people out there who are watching this and they're like, okay, I get it. I'm there with you. I think this is messed up. What can I do?
What can you do to help? I mean, that's a good question. And right now I don't have the answer. I mean, we have had an amazing outpouring of support. Like the internet comments are just on fire, the kind of support that we've been getting. But that, I mean, what does that really do for us? Nothing. If I had to ask for one thing, it would be for people to reach out to their congressmen and women and their state senators and ask that they remind the ATF that they are not a legislative body. I don't know how much it would help us to have, a few congressmen and senators, behind us.
I think it would help a lot, actually.
I mean, well, I will take all the help I can get. Yeah. And I'm kind of surprised. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm surprised that a few specific organizations haven't reached out yet and said, hey, what can we do to help? Like, where is your pain point? Where is your weak spot? Like, what? And the phones haven't been ringing. So I kind of expected them to, just simply because if we lose, this is a big loss for all gun owners, not just us.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I want to piggyback off that and say, I think one thing that people can do, one, is share this video. And the reason why I say that is because you make enough noise after a certain point, the noise isn't worth it. Quiet is kept. I know a lot of people like to think, oh, they just do whatever they want. They don't care what the people think. That's to the contrary. I think a lot of times they do put their finger up to the wind and see which way the wind is blowing and do what they think they can get away with quietly. And then I think if there's enough noise that's made, I think that can have a huge impact on the way that things end up going and playing out.
Well, I'm definitely going to take a different approach than most companies do. Most companies, they take it on the chin, they tuck their tail, and they go away quietly. Mm-hmm. I released a public statement late last week, and I brought everybody up to speed, and I'm not very nice about it. And to be honest, until a court tells me I've got to shut my mouth, I'm going to be very honest and open and share what's going on with the public.
Absolutely. And I think you should. I think you should continue to do that. And, I've had these conversations before with other companies, and I know how frustrating it is, and I know how annoying it can be, and I know how scary it can be at the same time. Not only just for the companies, but just the state of the Second Amendment as a whole. Because all these attacks are just different bites at the apple that is the Second Amendment, and inevitably there are going to be so many bites that all we're going to have left is basically a non-apple. But I do wish you the absolute best. I second the idea of everybody watching this video going out and writing or calling or getting in contact with their representatives and letting them know about this particular situation and why it's a problem and why the ATF needs to be reined back, because they are not in a position to make laws, and that they have the ATF basically trying to do their job.
And if anyone does happen to have any connections with any organization that may be able to offer some support, I'm over here with open arms. I'm happy to have all the support we can get.
You know how frightening it is to think about what happens in the moments before, during, and even days after having to use your gun in self-defense? When you first start carrying a gun for protection, it can be a very scary and nerve-wracking experience, especially if you haven't gotten the education and training you need to feel confident. I've been there myself, hoping I never have to go through a self-defense shooting, which is why I'm a member of the USCCA. As a USCCA member, you can eliminate some of the stress of carrying a gun for protection by accessing the amazing wealth of firearm education, training, and current state-specific gun laws of your state or states you may travel to. This can help you be prepared for, or hopefully even avoid, a self-defense incident. As a bonus, members automatically become insured on the self-defense liability insurance policy purchased by and issued to the USCCA. Click below to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, make sure you hit that bell symbol.